MenapU presents Deriving the Quadratic Formula.
What's this all about?
Hey folks, I got a quick video this week on deriving the quadratic formula. But before I dive in, I have a couple quick announcements. First, I have an extra video this week on being a better math student. That's to help those of you who are starting school up this week. And second, I've started to create some short cram videos on TikTok, so I'll have a link in the description about that. Okay, diving in, here we have a generic quadratic equation. We know it's a quadratic because we have degree 2 on the largest term. A would be the coefficient of the leading term, B is the coefficient of the middle term, and C is our constant, and the equation is set equal to 0. So whenever we're in this situation, we can use the formula below, the quadratic equation, to solve for values of x. Okay, before we derive the quadratic formula, let's review a couple of perfect square patterns. So here we have x plus k squared, and if we FOIL that out, our first term will be x squared. Then we'll have a k times an x, plus another k times an x, plus k squared. And cleaning that up, we'll get x squared plus 2kx plus k squared. Let's do the same with x minus k this time. When we do x times x, we're going to get an x squared for the leading term. We'll have one negative kx and another negative kx, and then, just like before, a k squared. So notice we'll get our middle term now will be negative 2kx, just like above, plus k squared. And that middle term for both of the equations is what is important for the step we're about to do next. So notice this pattern again where we have double what our constant was here and then squared of that constant there. And when we have the negative, it's the same thing. We have double what k was and then k squared here. So if you watched my previous video on completing the square, that's what we're going to do now to derive the quadratic formula. We're going to start by dividing through by the leading coefficient. So we'll get x squared plus b over a, that'll be our new middle term, the coefficient of our middle term, plus c over a, and 0 divided by a is still just 0. From last week's video, we know that we're supposed to take that middle term now and divide it by 2, and then square the result, and that will tell us what we need to add in order to create a perfect square that we can factor. So this will be b squared over 4a squared. So that's what we want to add to both sides of the equation now in order to create a perfect square on the left. So we're going to have an x squared plus b over a plus b squared over 4a squared. Now what I'm going to do at the same time is I'm going to bring the c over a to the right. But before that, I have to keep both sides of the equation balanced. So I'm going to add my b squared over 4a squared, and then I'm going to have my negative c over a that I subtracted from the right side. Next step, the left is now a perfect square. We can turn it into this form, where it looks like x plus b over 2a. We know it's b over 2a, and this whole thing will be squared. We figure that out from this step up here, that this would kind of be our k that we saw on the previous slide. So that's what we have on the left now. On the right, we're going to do some combining here. Notice that this has a denominator of 4a squared, so we're going to want to have this as one fraction with 4a squared on the bottom. That means I'm going to need to multiply the top and the bottom by 4a. And that's going to now give me b squared minus 4ac over 4a squared. We're now going to, sorry, I'm running out of room here a little bit. We're now going to take the square root of both sides. So we're going to have, and I'm just going to remove this real quickly so I have a little bit more room to work. We're now going to have x plus b over 2a. That's me taking the square root of the left side, equals the square root of the right side. Now the top, I can't simplify that under a square root. I'm going to leave that as the square root of b squared over 4ac. But notice the bottom of this fraction, the 4a squared, that is a perfect square. That is 2a times 2a. So we're going to have a 2a right here. And remember, this is plus or minus. We have to have the positive or the negative possibility. Cleaning up just a little bit more, we're going to subtract b over 2a, bring it over to the right, plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac, all over 2a. And now final step, we could combine this as one fraction and get our quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So hopefully that was relatively painless. Let's now go ahead and try using the quadratic formula with a practice problem. Go ahead and pause the video here if you'd like to attempt it on your own. Let's forge ahead. So we know that x is going to be equal to the opposite of b. Remember, 7 here is b, so we're going to write negative 7 plus or minus the square root of b squared, that's going to be 49, minus 4 times our a times our c. And this will all be over 2a, which in this case is going to be 4, because this is a and this is c. Let's clean it up. So we'll have a negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 49. We have negative 4 times 2, that's 8, times another negative 5, and that's going to be positive 40. And this will all be over 4. And now we'll have negative 7 plus or minus square root of 89 over 4. And I believe that 89 is a prime number, so we should be done. All right, let's try a second example. Go ahead and pause here if you want to try it on your own first. Remember, this is our a term, this is our b term, and this is our c term. And we know that x will be equal to the opposite of b. In this case, it's going to be positive 6, because the opposite of negative 6 is positive, plus or minus the square root. Our b is negative 6. You square that, you get 36, minus 4 times our a times our c. And this will be under the radical. And then on the bottom, we're going to have 2a, which in this case would be 6, because a is 3. Cleaning this up a little bit, we're going to get 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 36. 4 times 3 is 12, times another 3 is 36, all over 6. So this is a case where we're going to have only one solution. That plus or minus is going to fall out. We're going to end up with 6 over 6, or 1. All right, one last practice problem here. Go ahead again, pause if you'd like to attempt it on your own. Here our a is a negative 1, so negative 1 is a. Our b is 7, and our c is negative 6. So we're going to have x equals the opposite of 7, so that would be negative 7, plus or minus the square root of 49, that'll be 7 squared, minus 4. Our a is a negative 1, and our b is a negative 6. And all of this is going to be over negative 2 because our a is -1. So we'll have a -2 on the bottom. All right, let's clean this up. We'll get -7 plus or minus square root of 49 minus 24. We have 3 negatives being multiplied by each other. So that's going to result in 24 at the end of the day, a -24 at the end of the day, over -2. And let's clean this up a little bit. Now, I'm going to take the negative on the bottom and the negative on the top. This is a plus or minus, so if I divide through by a negative, it doesn't really matter because I'm still getting both options. So I'm going to turn this into 7 plus or minus the square root of 25, which we know is 5, because that's 49 minus 24, all over 2. And just to finish up here, we're going to do 7 plus or minus 5 over 2. And that's going to give us 2 answers. We're going to have 7 plus 5, which is 12 over 2. Or 7 minus 5, which would be 2 over 2. Which means we are looking at 6 or 1. All right, bottom line. Whenever we have any kind of quadratic equation, we can use the quadratic formula. X is equal to -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all that latter part under the radical, over 2a. We can use this to solve quadratics when all else fails. The reason I say that is because it's an unwieldy calculation. It can be kind of tough. I always say it's a method of last resort. Well, that's all I have for today, but before I let you go... All right, Violet. Let's tell the folks how they can help grow the channel. Please like, subscribe, comment about future content you'd like to see and how I can improve these videos, tell your classmates, and consider joining the flock on Patreon for extra practice problems and videos with tips for taking standardized tests. Please see the description below for details.